Hey there, everyone. Sergio here, Max Business Profits, small business coaching consulting firm. I'm here once again with my good friend and home inspector extraordinaire, Rick Kooyman. Today, we're going to talk about the real estate contracts um, in Naples, Florida. There's the board contract, the NABOR contract, and there's a state contract called the FAR bar. And Rick is going to discuss with us the nuances of those contracts in respect to home inspections and inspection periods. So, with that being said, Rick, let's go ahead and dive in and tell us what you know.
All right, great to be with you again, Sergio. Yeah, and I think this is an interesting conversation that oftentimes gets overlooked or bypassed in the buyer's purchasing, experience, and it just kind of gets chosen by the realtors and the brokers at a lot of times. But there are some change. There are not just changes. The thing's always changing, I'm sure, but there's some variations that I see people getting caught up on a few times, and I hear about it. It comes back around and they want to know why things are the way they are. So I thought maybe we'd take a minute and discuss how it comes to be that way and look at the fundamental basics of, there's basically three different forms of buying stuff. And there's two, like you said, there's two different contracts, the FAR bar and the NABOR. You can be either buying vacant land, so you have a vacant land contract, and there's, the two versions of that. And within that contract by itself, they're pretty identical in my opinion. And by no means take this as legal advice. This is just my interpretation of what I see going on and how I read this variations in these little clauses of these contracts. But the due diligence period is most important. And even when it's in vacant land, you want to make sure of the environmental stuffs and the county rules, and you really got to spend a little more time on it than you may think in assessing the usability of land, especially down here in Florida, because they're trying to reclimate a lot of what they had done in the past. And at some point it's got to get paid for. So
Interestingly enough, you've kind of just went through this yourself. You sold a piece of property, um, and there's people think they come down here and they're going to buy a piece of land, they're going to start building on it. But we know, don't we, that there are some nuances to that as well. I mean,
absolutely.
we had to figure out whether or not there was any kind of standing water or topographical streams or creeks running through a property. I mean, you can look. I've gone through this myself, where I've flipped some property not too far from where I live, and looking at the property itself from a topographical point of view. The state can come in there and say, well, right down the middle of this lot right here, there used to be an old creek or some sort of marshland, which, if you went to the land today, you'd look at it and go, ain't nothing on here but weeds.
Yeah,
Right?
it's an
You know,
abandoned orange field.
yeah, they'll go on there. They'll do
Yeah,
what I call
that's
a
the reckoning.
botanical survey.
Yeah, absolutely. And
They'll look at what
it's
kind of
the whole
plants.
ecology. It's
Yeah,
not just the plants, it's the wildlife. And, at this point, it's very expensive to develop undeveloped land in, especially in Collier County in
yeah,
particular.
yeah. If you have a
There's a lot of
wetland,
limitations on just buying vacant land. And like you said, we did just move through a lot we had purchased, and we just finally got rid of it ourselves, and that's great. And we're still in the market for things, but it was very interesting to see some of the complications of how permitting works, and the order of events, let's put it that way, that have to occur for the county to let things happen. And it's not always exactly as you think it would be. It's very much, we want single family homes built as a whole unit, and we want them built by professional builders. And that's anything other than that, there's going to be a lot of pushback on.
well, the funny part about it is, and you and I have had this discussion, is you buy something, you think you own it, right?
No.
And then you go out there and you take down a few bushes or you cut down
Yeah.
a pine tree or something,
And you
and
get the letter.
you got the letter, right? What are you
Yeah.
doing?
Yeah,
You can't do
you get
that,
the code violation letter, and
right?
you find out that you weren't allowed to cut down the tree that's been in your yard the whole time you've lived there for 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, we're not talking
The
like a
native
cypress tree.
species.
Yeah, we're not talking about a cypress tree. We're talking about maybe a pine tree, maybe even a pepper hedge. You know, you
Yeah.
clear a spot to park your car,
Right.
and all of a
And if
sudden
it's
you
on
don't
the
have the guy.
wrong elevation of ground and you cut it, there is a way for them to make that difficult on you. And depending on where and how and why, it may or may not occur. But yeah, that's a very intriguing thing.
God forbid you have a turtle or a tortoise walking through that
Yeah,
lot at
if
some
you
point
have
in time.
something nesting on there that's protected, you might
Yeah,
wait 5 years to be able to use that land,
yeah.
you know,
So
because
it's
you
crazy.
can't do anything but leave it alone and wait for it to take its natural course. And if it wants to live there its whole life, it gets to,
Yeah.
and you get to wait until it's done.
A tenant that doesn't want to pay anymore. You can't get them off. You can't get them out. But yeah,
This
so
is
that's a whole
nature.
nother topic. But
Yeah.
just I want everybody to know that this some of this is born from personal experience. But yeah, let's go on and go ahead and we're not as concerned with vacant land contracts as we are as it comes to the
The
structures.
properties,
Yeah,
yeah. But, definitely do your due diligence if you're looking at vacant land and you wanna do development and stuff, and you really wanna get into the EPA and the wetlands and the development fees and elevations and wildlife and the whole 9 yards of it all, and it's all important, but most of the time when it's an existing property, you've kinda gone past that step unless you're gonna do an addition or build another property, another structure on the property,
right.
then you gotta kinda go through the same hoops in that. But outside of that comment and that conversation, back to just looking at these contract differentials, that there's the property purchase contracts we're looking at now. So there's basically two ways you can move forward with buying an existing structure, and they're generally referred to as the standard residential purchase agreement or the as is contract. And again, there's a NABOR version and a Florida bar version of both those. Now, in the as is side of things, there's not a giant bit of, difference in the things that I see people having headaches with, as as long as you know that you definitely want to make sure of the land stuff, and you have to make sure that you have the right exit.
Right. Well, while we're at it, why don't we just differentiate the NABOR contract versus the FAR bar contract? So the FAR bar contract is basically a Florida Association of Realtors contract with the state of Florida. It's a good contract. I've written that contract many, many times and I prefer it. The NABOR contract is basically a contract drawn up by a bunch of attorneys in NABOR stands for Naples Area Board of Realtors. So you can imagine that was a bunch of Naples attorneys on the payroll for the board, just writing a contract that would best suit them, takes the liability off the realtors, and puts it solely, almost solely to me, in my opinion, on the buyers.
Yeah, that's exactly the point there, right? Exactly. And that's
Everyone
what I
be
think
aware. I mean,
most people are not catching that very point is it's put on the buyers. And and oftentimes the buyer's not aware of that differential that mostly comes in not in the as is contract, but in the general purchase agreement. And just like you said, the NABOR contract was written for the advantage of the realtor side of things. And this is a very important point because it goes to the point of the actual legitimacy of a buyer's agent, and does a person that's getting paid a straight commission represent you most first, or are they representing their own interest in timeliness of getting to that final closing? And there's a desire to get paid by everybody, right? And these contracts are written to get to closing as soon and as smoothly as possible, in my opinion. So the NABOR contract was specifically added to, as I see it, to facilitate the closings of deals that would probably, in my opinion, be walked away from. And except for the form of the contract that purchase agreement got written on, people are finding out that they're not able to get out of a potential buy after the inspection, and they find out a few things about the house, but it's actually written out of one or the other contracts. And the one particular one that I see the most oftentimes is regarding mold in particular,
It's
the
become,
NABOR contract.
it's become quite a subject in the last couple of years due to recent weather events. So I think it.
Yeah, and there's really nuanced differences between the two contracts in regard to what are called defective items and cosmetic items. And this is everything about what we do and write our report. So this is how that is determined, and then who is responsible for what and when. And on the FAR contract, if you read what is the owner's responsibility is basically to fix more defective items than on the NABOR contract. And the NABOR contract is going to exclude, like I said, Aspergillus penicillin in particular as a problem with the house. And that is the most common form of toxic mold we come across. And that reason, in my opinion, it was put in that contract is just that, because it is so prevalent that they don't want to see the contracts canceled over it time and time again. And they tweak the contract so that the buyer can't get out. If that's the only issue of contention, they're obligated to still purchase that mold contaminated house at their purchaser's expense. And you got to be aware that that's within these contracts. So when you're writing your
So basically what they're saying is, okay, here's your inspection period. You've got until this date to arrange your inspections, get them in there, get your reports back. Okay. And then let's say someone goes in there, someone like you goes in there and goes, you know what? We're tracking a little bit of mold. Probably needs a little bit of remediation somewhere in that house. And I don't know what a little bit of remediation means.
It can't even be like a whole room completely black with mold. But if it comes back as Aspergillus at any level or quantity, it doesn't matter.
Right. So they're saying, okay, yeah, we see it, but don't worry about it. You need to follow through with the purchase.
Yes, without adjustment or negotiation needed. Right? You could fight about it all you want, but you sign the contract, and this is not a reason to change the contract. Even though you may not have ever seen the property and you saw listing photos and a walkthrough, and they never actually showed you the guest bedroom that was, destroyed with mold and has affected the whole rest of the house, but you didn't know that, and nobody was
It
showing.
really doesn't even have to be that dramatic.
But it can be, and that's even worse, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it can literally be just, a dirty air handler, and we just want the air duct cleaned and the house sanitized. I mean, this is a pretty simple ask down here, and this is why it's very common that they have this issue, because, air systems more often than not are contaminated. And more often than not, I walk into a home to do the inspection, and honestly, I can't wait to get out because my throat's irritated from the allergens in the air. And I go in so many of them, we get more sensitive every time we get in exposure to these things. So the allergens, they present themselves pretty apparently, in your olfactory after a while. So, it's pretty evident to us, but maybe not to you when you walked in there and you're from out of town and you're just like, I don't know, it smells like a Florida house. Well, it sounds like a Florida man comment to me, I mean, there's more to be said about that. Let's look at that a little more. This could actually get expensive for you. And that irritant is going to affect your health. It's literally going to affect how you think, how you feel, and your mood and your hair.
I think it should certainly at least affect the price tag, right?
Yeah, exactly. But again, that NABOR contract doesn't even give you the right to negotiate on it. And that's just a tragedy, in my opinion. But regardless of that, there are variations in the two different contracts. And I just want people to pay attention to all the verbiage and not just the blank lines that got filled in on the agreement. And, we agreed to this number and this date and that date. but literally look at what your due diligence contract says. Look at what your rights as the buyer are for, who's responsible for defective items and what are the definitions of those defective items. And when you see the word shall, that means you must. And if it doesn't say shall before it, it's not a legal requirement to be done. And oftentimes it will be a shall not comment. And these are the things that people aren't looking into, or they're looking past, and then it's coming back in the end and in our detailed reports, because people want to know all the details and we give it to them, but then they're like, well, you gave us all these details, but now we're having problems and we got stuck with this, and it's almost like you told us bad news. I want to
Are you talking about
preempt
the
you.
realtors saying that, or?
Well, yeah, we'll have that conversation in the next go around about the deal killer and where we stand in this whole
That's the next
situation at the
podcast.
comment.
Literally,
Yeah,
that's the next podcast.
yeah,
Why home inspectors are viewed as deal
the
killers.
deal killers. Yeah, we'll get to that one next. But this one is before we get to having that argument about whether we want to close or cancel, and what your rights are, and and again, buyer beware, man, buyer beware. And again, I can't tell you how many times I see transplant people, oftentimes widows, who, are new to generally just owning property themselves to begin with. And now they want to come to Florida and basically live the retired life. And there's the equal amount of the new realtor to the area that are working with the new residents, and there's just not a lot of local knowledge being pushed, and they're like, I've been, doing this for 25 years. It's just a new town, whatever. Again, there's differences. It matters who you work with.
What you're saying is selling real estate in Naples, Florida, is a tad bit different than selling real estate in Indiana.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then buying real estate,
Yeah.
the risk, and the overlying differences of our environment, and the changes that we're going through in the market, and just not just the real estate market, but the insurance market and the ownership market. And a good part of that includes and gets piled into the homeowners side of things on the HOA stuff, because everybody's within a community, and the communities now have to have these withholdings, and there's all these new assessments coming up because there's all these new needs to be met, and everything is kind of out of date, and there's a lot of need for stuff to be caught up and brought up to what is new code now. They don't want it just repaired back to how it was. They really want everything brought up to new code,
Well,
because they don't want to keep recurring damage.
right, like that 50% rule, but I think that
Yeah.
50% rule is completely out of line.
It's very difficult.
Yeah.
Very difficult. But there's reason for it, but it doesn't favor the owner or the resident. It's very difficult.
So
But
while we're on the
people
topic,
get caught on it.
yeah. Well, so while we're on the topic, before you move on to the differences in the contracts, in your opinion, what is the minimum amount of time for inspections down here? How long?
They need at least 12 days.
Yeah,
And that's if you know who you're going to work with as an inspector. And, that's a good conversation to have. Just like when you're getting and finding the realtor you want to work with, you should be looking for the inspection company you want to work with too, and get to know who you want to do that with, because that's a very important part of the process. And, you know, I guess it gets overlooked too many times. It so buyer
it's it's the parties who have the most vested in it, right? So
yeah,
realtors are like, no, 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 you gotta buy, gotta buy, gotta buy, right? How many times have we heard that's the greatest time to buy real estate ever, right? And we all know that's not necessarily the case, depending on what your needs are. But so yeah, so I don't think I've ever written a contract for less than 14 days
yeah.
inspection period, and that's
And then oftentimes that's comes up short for people. The 12 days, like you said, the 14 days is 2 weeks is much better because there's a need to follow up my report with the contractors in the various fields to at least give estimates, if not do some of the needed repairs. Again, depending on which contract you use, there's a defective items list of stuff that the seller is required to repair
Right.
to facilitate the closing as per the contract.
Or
And
not.
or not.
Right.
And, again, FARBAR versus NABOR, and,
Right.
it's in there. And, the buyer and the seller oftentimes don't realize their responsibilities, and they sign these contracts and they don't realize that they have a responsibility as the seller to fix the leaky roof. It says so in the contract. If it's leaking, you have to fix it, or if there's radon over the active action level of 4.0, you're required to remediate it. Well, that's all.
Termites.
Yeah, termites, but in some contracts it's excluded and in others it's not. So these are big deal items that get lost in the black type.
And I'm gonna give everybody the remedy to that as you get on. Won't tell people how to deal with that. But go ahead.
Okay, well, let's just look at the FARBAR says is what is defined like a property condition, right? And this is I'm just basically reading straight from this older contract, and I'm just going to start midline and somewhere, and it says working condition defined below: torn screens, including pool and patio screens, fogged windows, and missing roof tiles or shingles, shall be repaired or replaced by seller prior to closing. Seller is not required to repair or replace cosmetic conditions defined below, unless the cosmetic conditions resulted from a defect in an item. Seller is obligated to repair or replace. Working condition. Now, this is where it gets defined, right? So, this is the defective item. What is it? And it means operating in a manner in which the item was designed to operate. Now, how do we interpret that in our world as an inspector? And how do we, like we train people? Is it performing its intended function? Is the words we use, right? Is it doing what it was manufactured to do in the way it was manufactured to do it? And that's often the part that gets kind of argued with in the way it was intended to be used.
Yeah.
And
Give me an example. Like give me a
again, here's an easy one. The kitchen faucet,
right.
It's broken off, it's hanging loose, but you turn it on, it turns on, you turn it off, it turns off, it still works. Well, are you required to fix it or not? Well, in my opinion, it's not intended doing its intended function. It's broken. We all know that. That's not how it was manufactured. It was not intended to be used that way, and it's going to result in a catastrophic water problem inevitably because it was damaged from how it was intended to be used. So it's defective. But these are the differences in wording and approach. And, oftentimes there are a lot of realtors out there that will talk their way into the mind of the inspector to get them to do what they want to do, and that is get to closing. And oftentimes that's representing the person that doesn't want to pay for the problem, right?
It's also a bit of self-interest in there too, right?
Yeah, for sure, right? So cosmetic condition means aesthetic imperfections that do not affect working condition of the item, including but not limited to pitted marcite, tears, worn spots, and discolorations of floor coverings, wallpapers, window treatments, nail holes, scrapes, scratches, dents, chips, or caulkings in ceilings, walls, flooring, tiles, fixtures, or mirrors, or cracked or minor cracks in walls, floor tiles, windows, driveways, sidewalks, pool decks, garage patio floors, cracked roof tiles, curling or worn shingles, or limited roof life shall not be considered defects. Seller must repair or replace so long as there is no evidence of actual leakage, or structural damage. Right? So therein lies $100,000 on most homes. That's the difference, you know, on most homes we have down here. They either do or do not have a new roof. And if they do not, they need to. And it's not how old is the one that's on there.
It's defective or not.
Yeah. They want to.
On how do you know if it's
That's based
defective
on your
unless
insurance rates.
right? And how do you know if it's defective or not unless you get someone like you to crawl up in the places nobody wants to go?
Right. And then in the insurance side of it, we're required to actually go in the attics and look for those indications of roof leakage in the attic. It says on the form, there's a checkbox. Are there indications of past or present staining from roof leakage? And it doesn't say is it wet?
Right.
It says, is there
Right.
indication past or current active leakage or staining?
Right.
That I can't tell you how many times I've told people to paint the damn stain because they want to know that it's not continuing to go on. And otherwise, the photo is what the photo is. And that's how it gets written up in the underwriter's world. And when you go and try to file a claim on it, they're going to go back to that 4-point document. They're going to go back to those photos and they're going to use it in their favor again against you. So again, it goes to, you know, why do you want to pay more to have an insurance inspection done than the cheapest guy in town? Well, because the accuracy of that document matters to your policy greatly. Like everything about it is based on how well that guy does his job. And you're going to find out when it's time for you to actually want to make a claim. And then you're going to be too far down the road for that guy to be part of why you got problems. Right?
Thus starts the discussion of Rick, you're killing my deal.
There you go. There you go. And you know, there's also an interesting clause in here in the FARBAR contract that is intriguing in regards to how people can deal with a difficult inspection, right? So, you know, oftentimes I had a customer call me once and ask me if I was that MFer that did the inspection on said property. And I looked it up and I said, well, it appears to be that we did do that inspection for that property. And she said, good, I want to hire you for this house we're looking at buying. And she said, that was my house and I hated you. But now she knows who she wants to call when it's her one's protected. But interesting on that topic of an agitated homeowner who's dealing with an inspector that they don't like, or vice versa, a buyer, and they're not getting what they want from the inspections. You have a right to have a second inspection. You know, the other party can request an inspection from another inspection company, and the two reports can be compared. And if there's variations, there is actually a clause that says, well, there can be a mutually agreed upon third inspection party that everybody just agrees they're going to agree to.
Wow. Right.
Now, I don't know how you ever get to decide on who's going to do that.
It's like, you know,
But
we just kind of went through this with
it's
the price.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
but this is the stuff that's in these contracts that, you know, it's interesting to know what you're signing, you know, that, you know, if the buyer and seller's inspections report different and the parties cannot resolve the differences, the buyer and seller together shall choose and equally split the cost of a third professional inspector whose written report shall be binding on all parties.
Almost sounds like an arbitration.
Yeah, by inspector.
Yeah. Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
It's to hire the right guy the first time around, huh?
Doesn't it though? I mean, don't you want to be on the right side of that argument? If you know,
and what most people need to understand, and I hope there's some realtors listening to this too, you know, it's not about killing the deal, right? I understand that maybe you're representing the buyer or you're representing the seller in this respect. And if you're representing the seller, you should have gave them an option of getting a home inspection done prior to listing that property. So none of this stuff would ever come up, right?
it's already
It would be
disclosed.
taken care of, or it would be disclosed, right?
Yeah, there's so many advantages to the previous or the
Right.
lifting.
So I'm a firm believer in having one of these inspections done before you list the property. But if you're on the buyer side, why would you want to saddle your buyer with a problem like that? Why wouldn't you just look at
Yeah,
this point of negotiation, come to an agreement, mediate the problem, negotiate the problem? That's what you're paid for as a realtor. You're not here to take orders. You're not here to throw it up on MLS and hope somebody else sells it and you get a check. And by the way, that's not even allowed anymore due to the new regulations with NAR and FAR and the Justice Department. Point is, why would you walk around with an attitude at a guy who's just trying to make sure the buyer spends his money in the best possible way? Why?
ultimately, you would wonder why that is, but at the end of the day, the answer is over and over again the same. It takes longer to get to the paycheck for them, and most people don't want the delay in how many things gotta get resolved before the parties can agree or move on.
As a broker,
And
I've been a broker.
oftentimes, I've heard so many realtors say, "I want the inspector that gets everything done the first time and everything's right. Perfect." And I don't mean that the report's good. I mean, like, they never find anything. Like, they're the easiest reports, everything's always great. Well,
Right, no
that
problems. Let's go to
that's
close.
yeah, it's so easy. I get everybody to closing the first time. We go right through it. It's great. So easy. These your realtors should not be there to facilitate contracts being passed across the table. They should be there to represent your position in this deal and do the things that they're professionally in the industry to look out for you when you're not in the industry to know to do for yourself.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what? With the recent passing of the new laws, being a broker for 30 plus years, um, I ponder sometimes the ultimate outcome of whether or not buyers brokers or buyers agents are going to be going away, because quite honestly, if you take the same attitude you had before that rule change, there's no point in having you around. you
No.
know these days,
And then
someone wants a house, they go to Zillow, they go to Redfin, they look
yeah,
it up, they can deal directly with the
and I
seller. Right? If they're going to have an attorney look over the contract and close it for them, the attorney can negotiate price. Okay,
mhm.
so there's a lot of
And
things
you're
there.
oftentimes better off with the
Yeah,
attorney on the contract
yeah.
side of things
You
because
got
they're
an
an
agent who's
attorney
telling
in
you
a
sign it,
contract.
it's a good deal. Don't worry about this, that, and the
Bitchy.
other thing. That you just got taken advantage of, in my opinion.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that. I absolutely do. And I'm glad you bring up the change in the, you know, the the legislation change to try to favor the buyers, to protect the buyers and the interest and idea of a buyer's agent, in my opinion, is conflicted to say the least.
Yeah, there's a weird history behind it. I got to be honest with you. Most people don't know this, but 20, 30 years ago, like when I became a broker, like right now, agents are what they call transaction. They're not supposed to represent a party, right? That's what we heard for
Yeah, and
years.
that's the
Well, and it's wrong because back in the day when I became a broker, believe it or not, and people who are listening, I tell realtors this all the time who haven't been a broker or an agent that long. I said back in the day, both sides of the transaction, the buyer's agent and the seller's agent, represented the seller.
for sure.
The seller,
For sure.
right? But they always gave the impression that, oh, I'll write the
Yeah, yeah.
contract for
I'm
you,
your
blah, blah,
agent.
blah.
Yeah.
Then they started getting nailed for it. They
Mhm.
started, people started suing and saying, wait a second, you wrote the contract. Why didn't you tell me this? Why didn't you tell me that? So then they changed the law. So, okay, we're not representing any party now. We're representing the transaction, which for God, for all these years, I still don't know what that means.
Yeah,
But
we're
to me,
just
that
gonna
I
resolve
represent my
liability from
paycheck is what it
everybody.
means, right?
Yeah, right.
So they went to transactional in representation and fiduciary duty. And then now all of a sudden I'm hearing now that with the law change, they're going back to the buyer's agent represents the buyer's best interests, God help them, and
And
the sellers represent the seller's best interests.
yeah, and you
So now we have an adversarial relationship
And you
that
should have
should
a
benefit the buyer.
contractual agreement with your agent if you think you have a buyer's agent working for you. And
Right,
you
and
need to
if you've got
understand exactly
a
what
good
the
one,
expectations are.
yeah, a good one should be able to save you way more money than what you're paying the buyers the buyer's agent to represent you. But, you know, with
Yeah,
all
much like
this
I
nonsense,
say, you know, you might think my inspection report's expensive, but the money that I'm saving you in the negotiations is, you know, 100-fold of what you paid me. And
yeah,
that's exactly what your representative should be doing for you. But in this transactional way of doing things, the money is the driver of the thing, and everybody wants to see the coins passed across the table. And it's not about making sure that everybody's clear on what they're buying. It's about getting it done. And
yeah.
done is good. And good is not always done, as I say.
Well, not to put too fine a point on it, but I had introduced buyer brokerage agreements as a young broker. I learned it from a gentleman in Arizona back at the time, and this was going back. This has to be 88, 89, maybe even before that. But it shows you how old I am. But I was representing buyers here, which you could do as long as it was disclosed, right? You had to tell the seller's agent, I'm
I'm
representing this guy
representing,
here with the
right.
money, right? I can't tell you how many times listing agents told me to go pound sand. Or,
Mhm.
well, if you're
They didn't
representing
wanna deal
him,
with it.
you're representing him. We don't want nothing to do with that. And you can have him pay your commissions, even though there was a co-broke on the property. So in
Yeah.
essence, I would have to have my buyer pay me. He would have to pay the
In
price. So the
addition to the
seller would
price.
have to get, and back then it was 7%, not 6%. And he
Yeah.
would end up getting a full 7%. And I'd have to get it from the, I mean, what a crock of shit. You know,
Yeah.
not to, it's pardon my French, but really? Is that what we're here to do? Is just screw people over?
Yeah, and in today's day and price of everything in this world, you know, again, the the buyer's agreement is, you know, a new thing, and I think it's a good thing in that regard that it points out the clarification needed in the representative and what your expectations should be, and you should know going into them, you know, we're gonna pay 30 grand on $1 million home to our agent. And that's, you know, what this contract agreement says. And if
Which, you
that's
know,
the case, you should be getting 30 grand worth of service.
well, the realtors are highest paid people in that whole chain of events, aren't they? And you and I
Aren't
both know
they?
people who have sold houses or wrote a contract for somebody and then took off on vacation and trying to get a hold of them for an inspection and get them to make a phone call while they're on vacation
Yeah,
for the
they're on a
third time.
cruise.
They're on a cruise, or third time this year they're not available. Come on,
Mhm.
people, you're making 30 to $60,000 on a as a commission, and you can't
And
facilitate
actually
a little bit better.
facilitate and actually have an investment in the customer that you're supposed to be representing and not just shopping for that new car.
Yeah, right, right.
You know, and that's a funny story. I said that to somebody the other day. I said, you know, it was a family member. I said, imagine this. I come up to you and you're a realtor, and I said, I want to buy a new house. I want you to help me buy it. And you go, okay, great. What's your budget? And I go, you know, 800, maybe a million. Let's keep it there. And you go, well, that's good. I'm going to need you to buy me a Jeep Cherokee when we're done. Would you be like, that sounds reasonable?
Well, honestly, if you're dealing with $1 million property, that's probably pretty
Well,
close
I
to.
mean, but if you don't know it ahead of time, you see it on the closing documents and you're like, good Lord. But again, if you know it ahead of time, you might demand more from the people you're working with too.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, look, I've been in this business a long time. I never felt, and back in the day it was 7%. Now it's
Right.
6%. I don't think, especially now in a market that's trending downward, for you to get 6% of somebody's equity just for putting it in the MLS, okay? I have a problem with that. Always did.
Yeah.
Did.
There's not the time balance. isn't really.
And then they say, well, it's the seller's money, but no, ultimately it's the buyer's money, isn't it?
Yeah, ultimately it's the buyer's money.
Because if he didn't have to pay for that commission for the seller to pay, he could
It's
probably
gonna go
negotiate
in the
a better
mortgage.
price.
Yeah,
Try and negotiate a better.
exactly. And that was the argument with this whole realtor change. That was the collusion that Remax got to pay on,
Mhm,
that argument.
mhm.
But,
Yeah.
eh,
Let's move on.
know what your, liabilities and exposures are, and, like, when I, ask or people ask me, they call and they ask, "How much is the inspection?" And they wanna know, "Well, why are your prices higher than everybody else?" Or, "I'm at the top, maybe." Um, I simply ask them, "Well, how much risk are you willing to take?" If you're not looking to spend a bunch of money down the road of an unknowing occurrence, then an extra $100 today is probably not expensive.
Yeah. Well, let's be clear. We're not talking like you're asking $2,000 for an inspection. You're only,
I'm not even asking 1%.
yeah, you know what I'm saying? So, compared
We're
to your
down at like a
competitors,
10% on,
yeah. So
commission
using
rates. I
you,
mean, it's ridiculous.
right, using you versus using a competitor, we're talking about $100 to $200 difference, maybe. At the
Yeah,
top of the,
right. And, and again, everybody says the same thing afterwards.
yeah,
I'd never go anywhere else. Right. And nobody does it like he does it. And,
right.
and again, I'm not trying to, toot my own horn, but the reason I got into doing this was to do that. So I'm just doing the goal we set out to do.
Following the mission statement. All right. You have anything else you want to say about either one of those contracts? And
Yeah, one thing in finishing up and past the inspection period is actually you are obligated or righted in your contract to do another walkthrough inspection prior to the closing to confirm that, the agreed upon things are as they should be. And you can also have it revisited by an inspector at that time if you're not comfortable in confirming those things. And also, outside of what is generally included in many inspections is the permits on the history of a structure and the update histories and stuff like this. And it's a big thing that needs to be not overlooked. And in the contracts, it's spelled out who's responsible for, say, the cost of getting an open permit closed. And in some cases it's the seller, and in some cases it's not the seller. And, I had not as is contract for sure. If you're on an as is contract and you're buying a residential property, you are buying those open permits. You are buying those code violations. And that's on you to fix. There is no two ways about that.
the county will come and
And that's when people actually come because people now are finally looking at, well, how did this old house get to look brand new? And there's like no new permits on file for anything. Or maybe the only thing there is a roof permit and the whole inside of the house is brand new. Insurance wants a new 4-point with all the photos. And they want to know, well, how old is that stuff? Well, one of the main ways they want those proved is through county records, right? And then if the
no
county
record.
records aren't there, flags start to go up. So,
Well,
oftentimes it gets brought out in the transaction side of a real estate deal
yeah.
that there
Well,
are
that's what
permit people.
title
Yeah,
searches are for, and open permits. But
absolutely.
sometimes things are done to a property without a permit, and you go and
That's
you
true.
look at it,
That's what I'm saying, and
and you look at
and
stuff
you're
on the record, and you're like, wait a second, there used to be a
right, and
garage.
it's not just that the stuff on record is correct,
Yeah.
it's that the structure matches what's on record, and that when you buy a property on an as-is contract that looks modern and updated, you are buying the inspections that didn't get done also, which is generally, we want that taken apart, we want the walls opened up,
Oh yeah.
we need the rough end inspections completed. We want all the junctions, fittings exposed and inspected and signed off by our county inspector. And then you can put it back together. And when you're done, we'll come back and verify that you did that to an acceptable level.
And by the way, there are fees involved with that, and there's a fee.
And there's a fee for not having it done
Yeah.
at the right
Yeah.
time. So yeah. and you're buying that problem. It's, you might find out after closing because, it was done without a permit and it didn't come up on the closing discussions.
That's right. That's right. Well, one thing I'll say before we wrap it up. So the remedy from a contractual standpoint um, is an addendum. Addendum to a FAR bar, an addendum to a NABOR contract, because all language on an addendum, particularly with a FAR bar contract, supersedes everything on the contract. So
Yeah.
if you're a buyer and you go in there and you say, you know what? I don't like the language of this contract. I really don't want to be responsible for that. You are allowed to put that as an addendum when you make the offer.
As
That
part of the deal.
decline it or accept it. And
Absolutely.
holds. And I can't even tell you almost every contract I write has an addendum of some sort on it, because even though if it's in the contract and it's vague, I'm going to clear it up in an addendum. There's going to be no questions asked about that. A lot of times when we flip properties with the banks, we put, basically the addendum became the contract.
Right.
It's a weird way of
Yeah.
saying it.
And
The addendum becomes the contract.
this is a great key cue to know when you're working with the right people and not, because oftentimes you're just going to get a contract with no addendums and
They just fill out, they check the
and
box.
then just like you said, if I write a contract, it almost always has an addendum. It's like if I write a report, I'm probably going to find something, right? It might be a little thing, but very rarely is there nothing wrong with the property. Very rarely is a contract exactly perfect for that deal. So yeah, there should be some tweaks or addendums to it. And just because they're at the end, like you said, they supersede the original language of the contract. And it's all, part of the negotiation process. And if these things aren't being brought up or looked out in your best interest, that should be a red flag to you.
An example too would be like on some of those contracts, you're saying, the occurrence of penicillin, what aspergillus,
Aspergillus penicillin, yeah.
right, doesn't void the contract, but you could put in the addendum, any
Any mold,
any mold found regardless of
any
type
allergen,
invalidates this agreement.
right, right.
Why
Because
not?
ultimately in the world of mold and law and transactional things, there's basically three what they call toxic molds, which is Stachybotrys, Aspergillus penicillin, and or Chitonium. And then there's like 20 other molds that get counted or identified, but they're called allergens.
Right.
That means they just annoy the hell out of you. The top three will literally affect your health and put you in the hospital.
Sure.
And one of them's that aspergillus that is literally written out of the NABOR contract, which, like you said, you can simply put it in an addendum and say any mold of any nature, and that gets over the allergen thing, in my opinion.
And not that we expect, these air quality tests to come back 100% perfect, let's say.
You're not buying a clean room, man.
Right. Right. But at least you have an option. You have an out if you want to take it, and you have an option.
Yeah, exactly. You have that right to cancel,
Right.
which is present in the as-is contract, but you better know ahead of time that you're okay with not exercising that right to cancel.
The last thing you want is being sued for performance because some realtor did not read you the correct, choices on the contract. And now you're stuck buying a house with just a little bit of aspergillus penicillin.
Yeah, and you happen to be highly allergic to it, or just
Right,
have
or have COPD or
heart
some other.
transplant or something.
Sure.
Immune system's compromised, and you can't even begin to be in there.
Right. So what did we learn here? We learned that there's two contracts with very different language on it. We learned that anything you want to, kind of keep an eye on, or if you don't like the language in the contract, you can add an addendum. And thirdly, I think is absolutely positively have an inspection done, preferably by Rick. And lastly, I think the last thing we can say is, if you're thinking about selling or you're on the market now and you don't want to get caught with your pants down on something like this, have an inspection done right now.
Yeah, get that listing inspection done. Get covered. It makes and with this stale market, it helps facilitate the sale to say, we've got a full inspection detail.
Right, we got a clean
There
report.
it is.
Yeah.
Even if it's not clean, here's what it is.
Yeah, but you know what? If you have the inspection, there are some things you can clean prior.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
But even there's a lot of properties that get turned over because, people have passed on and people are out of state that are selling them. And there's, a big disinterest in the actual property. There's just interest in the value. And even there, the investment in that listing report is of value because even if you don't want to do the repairs, it facilitates the offer getting accepted and going to closing. So it just simplifies the whole transaction from the beginning.
look, to me, it's kind of like a title. If you pay a couple of $100 that you're going to end up paying at a closing for a title report, right? 200-300 bucks, whatever it is at this
Yeah.
point. That's
Don't find out at the last minute.
Well, but that's but that's also telling you if you can actually own this free and clear. If the title report comes back and says, yeah, no, we've got title problems here, are you
Yeah.
going to run out and just say, yeah, let me buy it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No,
Yeah.
right? But you could do that on the seller side of things too, is get your title examined
Sure,
and
you can.
spend a couple $100 and say, we even got the title cleared, we've got the DP reports, whatever it might be. But getting things done to facilitate selling the property is advantageous. Yeah. Pre-listing, listings, and we get also our inspection reports come with that 100-day warranty program. So
Yeah, why don't you tell them about that before we close out? That's a good.
that's good for the homeowner. That's whoever we're writing that report to. So, if you're the seller on the property and we come in and write an inspection report and the inspection report says said items were functioning and in working condition at that time, and then the buyer's inspector comes through and said, said faucet is broken now and doesn't work, and I said it was working. Well, under our policy, our coverage, our 100-day warranty program, you're going to get that paid for and fixed because our program is built to facilitate that coverage of the gap problem. So it's there
It's common,
intended for its purpose.
right?
Right.
And it's common. It does happen.
And it does happen, and there are changes, and and it's like everything in the insurance world. The reason that it works for them is it's a game of numbers. So we buy enough of them that ultimately they're willing to pay out on it when they have to.
Right. Well, it's like anything else. It's all about mitigating the risk, not just from the insurance company standpoint, but as a
Right.
buyer, you're mitigating the risk. As a seller, you're mitigating the risk. As a homeowner, you're mitigating risk. That's what warranties and stuff are all about.
All about.
Excellent conversation, Rick. I hope somebody gets something valuable out of this and implements it right away. Why don't you give them your contact information? And
Absolutely. Very good time talk. And that was, really good conversation. I agree. I hope people take a moment and delve into this a little bit. But yeah, if you want to reach out to me, please 239-537-1186. You can look us up online at tradesecretsinspections.com. You can find us anytime you want. You can text me, whatever you need, just give us a call. I'm here to help.
very good. All right, Rick. Thanks so much again. Awesome information. And I'm sure some people are going to get some benefit out of that. Keep on the good work, and we'll see you next time.
Till the next time.